Hey, yo, I want to talk about the X-Men. And first, because I know some of you don't read the title, these cards aren't real. There is an upcoming Magic Marvel Universes Beyond crossover, but today we're theory crafting what might be in that set. And even if that's not your jam though, stick around because I worked with an artist for this one and by God these cards need to be seen. And second, do you have any idea how hard this video was to make whilst hearing on a constant loop in my head? And I guess third, I haven't seen 97 yet. I'm getting to it, I hear it's good. And while I am basing these cards off of the characters from that show, it'll be the original series I watched when I was still young. If you saw this video of mine from like 6 months ago, you know I already theory crafted what I thought the Avengers would look like as Magic cards. Spoilers, nowhere near as good looking as these X-Men cards today. Oh lord, I may have to redo that video because these ones are so good. But I thought that with the release date of that crossover growing ever closer, that now would be a perfect time to make a follow-up video to that previous one. Just this time all about everyone's favourite colourful outcasts, the X-Men. As a heads up, I've designed these cards as if they're part of that wider crossover set. If this were just an X-Men focused set, then mutants would need to be in 5 colours to cover every base. But in a set featuring all of Marvel's characters, I'm thinking that the mutants archetype would be limited to just blue, black and red. So that's what I've done here. I've not massively focused on keeping true to the colour pie though, and more aimed to try and represent the characters with their powers and abilities. Also, like WotC seem to with every product now, I've given an eye to Commander with these designs, so bear that in mind. If you like what you see here, these are available to download for free from my Patreon, for you to print them out or whatever. I'm not an actual card designer, so I make no promises that they're balanced, or even functional for that matter. But they are there if you want them, and while you're on my Patreon, check out the tiers. Maybe even think about signing up if you want to help to support me to keep making videos and cards like these. Also, as I mentioned, for this video, I've collaborated with an artist friend of mine, Sen, just to add a bit of class to the proceedings around here. He has a YouTube which you can check out, which I will link in the description below, showing off some of his animations. Personally, I'd recommend See Me Burn. It's a short story about a witch trying to fit in with a medieval society. He's told me he's currently working on an animation called First Flight, which he describes as being like the eagle flight scene from The Rescuers Down Under. So, subscribe to his channel and keep your eyes peeled for that. Unlike me, he's also young enough to understand what Instagram is, so I'll link that below too. It's where you can find the art used for these cards without the frames or any of the text, and a bunch of his other illustrations including, yes, that top middle one is a swashbuckling Nightcrawler. So, my Patreon for the cards, Sen's Instagram for the art. I'm going to display his socials alongside each piece so you can't miss them. And with that being said, let's begin. God damn it. And speaking of that title sequence, I think we should look at the characters in the same order they were introduced in that original cartoon's opening. Which means up first is, drumroll please, Cyclops, Master Tactician. And already, look at that, Sen has done an amazing job. This outfit has always been the most comic book of any that Cyclops wears, but with the open hair and the big yellow leg straps, it's easily the best one. I think Cyclops is my favourite of the X-Men, and this art has done him justice. Cyclops is the field leader of the team, basically the commander, and so he needs to have colours which reflect that, meaning he's a 5-mana 4/3 in blue, black and red, because as I mentioned earlier, that's the 3 colour archetypes I think all mutants will fall into for this set, maybe with a few exceptions. Right, let's zoom in on the text box and talk mechanics. First, Cyclops is known for his vigilance, so, you know, I gave him vigilance. He's also got those concussive eye beams, which I felt Reach was a good representation of. He's also not just the team leader, but an amazing tactician. So, to reflect that, I've given him 2 abilities, other mutants you control get +1/+1, and, to crib from Gust Cloak Savior, whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may untap that creature and remove it from combat, to try and create the feeling of him giving out orders and directing the flow of a battle. Cyclops can sometimes be seen as a Boy Scout, so with this design I've leaned into a mildly risk-averse, doing things a bit safe playstyle, but one that still respects his awesome combat and leadership skills. Next up is Wolverine, Tortured Ronin. And look at that, look how cool that is. The forest, the snow, Sabretooth being just out of frame. This in particular thrills me. I think it's the implication of a narrative. I've always liked magic cards that depict a character doing something as well as the reason that they're doing it, instead of just posing or casting a spell for seemingly no reason. Action art like this intrigues and inspires the Vorthos in me to wonder what the story of the card is, and Sen's nailed that here. Anyway, As for the card and its mechanics, Wolverine is a 6 mana 4/4 in black and red. And he's a berserker with a power set that makes me think of combat, so if we zoom in, I felt a good keyword to reflect his claws and general fighting style was First Strike. But, let's face it, if Wolverine were going to have any keyword in the game, it would obviously be Regenerate. It's one of the things he's best known for. However, that's his powers. To reflect his personality, he has, when Wolverine enters, you may have it fight target creature. And he also gets, when Wolverine dies, you may put it into its owner's library 10th, because Weapon X, from the top. Which I added as a wink to Wolverine's enduring nature. Whether that's due to his regeneration ability or just plot armor thanks to his popularity, Wolverine always comes back. So, that's the design. A combat-focused recurring kill creature, which I feel is both a reflection of Wolverine's tenacity for fighting and getting himself wounded to the point of death before recovering after some time. Next up though, is Rogue, Grace and Power. Everyone's favourite Southern Belle, Sen once again nailing it in terms of art. Which I'm glad at least one of us did, because getting Rogue's mutant power to work in Magic was tough. And whereas, with the mechanics of the other cards I've designed here, I worry that they're over or underpowered or outright broken or unplayable, Rogue, I worry is just... it's a lot. Because she's got a lot going on, and I wanted to try and represent as much of her character as I could. Meaning, this design and some of my choices might be controversial. For instance, Rogue is a 7 mana 6/5 to reflect her incredible strength, and as you may have been able to guess from the frame, is in mono black. Rogue's mutant ability to steal from others to benefit herself is a playstyle often associated with black mana. Even if that philosophy doesn't gel with her personality, it is still what she does. As for her mechanics, well, I went over a bunch of ideas for how to reflect her powers. I mean, she has flying, obviously, but after that, maybe something where she taps a creature and then gains its power and toughness till the next turn? Or maybe she puts a counter on a creature for X number of turns and then gains its activated abilities for that long? I mean, it was tough and none of it felt quite right. But I finally settled on an older keyword, Wither, which means that she'll still punch the player in the face for full damage. But when it comes to creatures, she deals damage as -1/-1 counters to reflect her absorbing their strength. However, I'm now going to commit a sin of card design I complain about a lot on this channel. Because we're not done, so I'm going to move Wither up next to Flying, and also delete its reminder text. I know, but she has a complicated power set to translate to cardboard, so her next very wordy ability reads, whenever Rogue, Grace and Power, deals combat damage to a creature, you may have Rogue become a copy of that creature, except its name is Rogue, Grace and Power, it's a mutant, and it has this ability. Then, that creature loses all abilities for as long as Rogue remains a copy of it. Because it's not just strength that she steals, but abilities too. And as is sometimes depicted in the show, she'll knock out the people she's absorbed powers from, making them effectively useless. This isn't a perfect reflection of how her powers work, I know. I also understand there's not many creatures in the game that will have a chance to lose their abilities before her 6 power kills them outright. And the fact that she's giving the creature 6 -1/-1 counters is maybe a bit much. But in terms of accurately representing the character and her powers, I feel I did okay. Let me know in the comments below how you'd have done this one differently, or if you think this one works. Next up, it's Storm, Almighty Goddess. And if I wanted to get any of Sen's designs in foil, it would 100% be this one. I realise I'm probably biased by the cartoons, but of all of her costumes, this will always be my favourite. Something about the moon, wing, arm, cape things is just so iconic. Storm, as well as being a snappy dresser and powerhouse, is another character that's often put into a leadership role within the X-Men, being asked to head up teams just like we see with Cyclops. And so because of that, again like Cyclops, Storm is a 4 mana 2/3 in blue, black and red, because she needs those colours if you want her to be your commander. Oh, and only a 2/3 because her physicality is not why she's so powerful. Looking at her mechanics, we see that, like the majority of the X-Men women, Storm has flying. Now, I know what you're thinking in terms of keywords. Her name is Storm. But I didn't want to be that obvious with it and give her some sort of storm mechanic. However, I did want to nod towards it because dramatically scaling up the powerful effects you've cast is very on brand for her. So, when Storm, Almighty Goddess, enters, choose a card from among Spark Jolt, because it reflects both her lightning powers and her strong battle tactics, Release to the Wind, because she doesn't always hit people with lightning and this card's flavour just felt so on point, and Lightning Storm, Because A, it's called Lightning Storm, and B, it's a hilariously fun card that maybe isn't great but is a laugh to play with. And then, as that nod to Storm that I mentioned and kind of where this card goes off the rails, create a copy of the card with the chosen name. You may cast the copy. If you do, copy it for each time you've cast Storm, Almighty Goddess this game -1. So, you still have to pay the mana cost of the card that she creates, you can't cast it for free, but it will have a Storm-like effect where you get additional copies of the spell for free for each time you've cast Storm this game, presumably from the command zone. With a -1, which I understand confuses things a bit, but you already get one copy when she enters, so that -1 is just for the additional copies of the spell that you picked. In essence, the first time you cast her, you get one spell and you get 0 copies. So, one spell overall as you've cast her one time. The second time you get one spell, but one free copy, so 2 spells overall as you've cast her 2 times. The third time you get one spell and 2 free copies, so 3 spells overall because you've cast her 3 times, and so on, each time only having to pay for the first spell. Does that make sense? Is that intuitive? Let me know in the comments. Next up, it's Beast, Gentleman Scholar. And I must say, I really love that he's holding the book with his feet. Beast was a funny one design-wise, because there's a lot of mechanics you could argue would be appropriate for his power set. However, I feel those same arguments could also be made to just make him a vanilla creature, only with a really high power and toughness. He is one of the strongest X-Men after all, even if he doesn't always show it. And it's actually that aspect of the character that I decided to focus on. Beast is a 5 mana 5/5 in mono blue, because that's a reflection of who he truly is rather than what he can do. And what I mean by that is, he breaks the colour pie, but even that's kind of in keeping with his character. Let me show you. The first ability he has is First Strike, something you don't really see on blue cards basically ever. And even rarer is his second ability, Menace, which again, not something you see on blue creatures. But his third ability reads, you have no maximum hand size. And then, whenever Beast, Gentleman Scholar attacks, investigate, reflecting his inquisitive nature as he creates clue tokens to draw cards. All of which I think represents the dichotomy of the character. He's a learned man of science and philosophy. He spends the entire first season of the show in prison, calmly awaiting trial because he believes in the justice system. And yet, he looks like a big blue monster, and he calls himself Beast. I think having the physicality to have combat mechanics like First Strike and Menace, but still choosing to focus on card draw and hand size and be in mono blue, is a better representation of the character than I could have ever achieved simply through mechanics. I said at the start I wasn't going to concern myself with colour pie breaks, and you're free to disagree, but I feel like the ones I presented here are what make the character. What do you think? Next up, it's Gambit, Cajun Card Shark. Easily one of the coolest X-Men, something that the art has again captured perfectly. Gambit is a fun one, because he's all about throwing explosive playing cards. And what better game to represent that than Magic the Gathering, a literal card game about flinging spells. I don't know what they'll do with him in the proper set when it comes out, but if they don't somehow tie his mechanics into the fact that, just like him, you too have a deck full of cards, I will be disappointed. But before we talk the mechanics I picked, Gambit is a 4 mana 3/3 in blue and red. I was thinking of making him a 2/3 because he's not really known as a full-on fighter, but he does have that staff, so yeah, 3/3. As for mechanics, well, first up, nice and easy, spend 4 mana and tap him to draw a card. But then what? I considered giving him something like discard a card, then maybe deal 3 damage to any target. But your hand could be empty and Gambit never runs out of cards, so I thought it would be more fun to take cards from the library instead. Spend X and red, exile the top X cards of your library. Gambit, Cajun Card Shark, deals 2 damage to target creature blocking or blocked by it for each card exiled this way. Very similar to how Steadfast Armasaur works, but by exiling cards from your library instead of using his toughness to work out the damage. I'm not sure I could articulate why, but I think having Gambit exile cards to ruin a creature he's in combat with, rather than just sitting back and tapping or whatever to deal targeted damage, makes him much cooler to play with. Your opponent is really going to have to question whether it's worth attacking or blocking when Gambit is on the board, and even that I feel leans into his nature as a gambling fan of card games. I really like this one. Next up is Jubilee Explosive Mall Babe. With her yellow and pink colouring, her bubblegum, and her Brett the Hitman Hart glasses, she's a character that screams the 90s. In the first season of the show, Jubilee is new to the team and is just figuring out her powers. We've shown a couple of instances where she's still getting the hang of using them and how they're not always effective. A lot of enemies she goes up against refer to them simply as fireworks and treat her as little more than a distraction. However, she is causing explosions on an atomic level, and that's a power that just can't be ignored, so to try and capture all of that, Jubilee first off is a 2-mana 1/2 in mono red, the lowest costed character to reflect her status as a rookie. Now, when it comes to mechanics, I wanted something to represent the fact that her main role in combat is kind of to run interference. So, I gave her flanking. An old keyword which means if she's blocked by another creature that doesn't have flanking, they get -1/-1 till end of turn. You know, because she's distracting them by blasting fireworks in their face. But then, whenever Jubilee, Explosive Maulbabe, deals damage to a creature, doesn't have to be combat damage. If you can combo her with other cards and effects to deal non-combat damage, this ability will still trigger because her fireworks are ranged. You just have to help her achieve that because she's still untrained. Roll 2 6-sided dice. This is also to reflect the fact that she's still learning how to use her powers and there's a chance that they won't work as she intends. If you rolled 2 6s, exile that creature. Because again, causing explosions on an atomic level is a ridiculous power and one that has the potential to not just kill someone, but disintegrate them. Jubilee has a lot of risk-reward to her. Her cheap cost and low power and toughness means she's probably best used as a chump blocker, but her flanking means you have an option if you don't want to entirely use her defensively. The majority of the time, her main ability is going to do nothing. And without First Strike, she's not going to be winning any fights. But if you put in the time and the effort to set things up and combo off with her, give her a chance to ping damage across the board and reliably roll 6s, then she has the potential to be a powerhouse. All of which I feel represents the character well. Jubilee is pure potential, and currently she's not great in a fight, but with training... Next up, it's Jean Grey, Telepath Supreme. I've always found Jean's costume to be a little bit weird looking, but goddamn if Sen hasn't made it work. Now, a bit like with Rogue earlier, I'm once again concerned that Jean's personality conflicts a little with her power set, meaning the design choices I made for her card may be a little bit controversial. But okay, ignore the Phoenix in the room for a second, which, yes, is represented on the card, so don't worry. And just think about original flavour Jean Grey. Think about what her powers are, how they would work, what that would mean, and think about how that would translate to Magic the Gathering. Do you get what I mean? Well, either way, let me show you. So, our Girl Next Door meets Interstellar Power Incarnate is a 4-mana 2/1, which yes, is blue-black. Not the colours I would have first assumed for her either, but when you see what she does, you'll understand why, and hey, at least it's in keeping with her costume design a bit. For mechanics, once again, we have flying, which, this one I could argue. Is levitation flying? How often is she even really doing that? But she is capable of it, so she gets it. And then, spend 3 mana, tap, and discard a non-land card from your hand. Target player reveals their hand, you choose a card from it, that player discards that card, you lose 2 life. Because Jean Grey robs people of their memories, which leaves her weak and drained. She's Thoughtseize on a body. And she also gets Undying, which means if she dies she gets to come back to the battlefield stronger thanks to a +1/+1 counter. Rising from the ashes, as it were. And while I actually can't remember if the cartoons ever did the Phoenix saga, Jean as a character is so intrinsically linked to that concept that it just felt right to add it here. I also picked Undying specifically over, say, Wolverine's reshuffle ability, because Undying only works once, and usually in other media, once the Phoenix version of Jean dies, she tends to stay dead. I'm not sure how smart putting Thoughtseize on a body is, but it just perfectly represents her powers, and I've given it quite a steep cost. Part of the reason I think Thoughtseize is as powerful as it is its low mana cost, so I'm hoping that the cost increase here will balance it out. And finally, we have Professor Charles Xavier. Those eyebrows are perfect, no notes. Charles is a funny one to end on. He was the last character to be introduced in the cartoon's title sequence, but he's also not really an active member of the team. He is their leader, at least in the first season, picking the missions and assigning the teams. And we all know what his power set is, but making him overly aggressive in combat like Gambit or Wolverine didn't feel right. Setting him up as a combo piece like Jubilee or Storm didn't feel right. Giving him the ability to interfere with your opponent like Jean and Rogue didn't feel right. Because even though he's capable of all that, I'd say in terms of character, he's closest to Beast, and maybe Cyclops, who are both more passive, supportive characters for a deck. So, following that train of thought, Professor X is a 6-mana 0/4, incredibly powerful, so deserving of a high cost, even if that power doesn't come from his physicality. Being a 0/4, I imagine you already know what his first keyword is, Defender. Because he's a diplomat, He doesn't do a lot of field work, that's what he has the X-Men for. He's certainly not defenseless though, and that's reflected by having Ward 4. He should be hard to mess with, he is after all one of the world's most prominent telepaths. But what is his goal, his ambition, what's his life's work? I think to raise up all mutants, not just the ones that agree with him. And so, other mutants get +1/+1 and have Ward 2. Notice the lack of the words that you control. Because I like to believe that Charles would go out of his way to keep all mutants safe, even those that would wish him harm. Again, I haven't seen the later seasons, I don't know if that changes. I know he has a heel turn in the comics, but again, I'm basing this off the cartoons. Ward 2 on all other mutants is a big deal, so 6 mana felt right. But I'm also willing to admit that I may be off on the playability of this card. However, any which way, Professor Charles Xavier is the last of the X-Men from that original title sequence, and that means that he's the last that we're covering here today. Before we leave, let's take one last scroll through all of the cards here to take another look at them and let me ask you, which one is your favourite? Which one do you like the art for the best? Which one do you like best mechanically? Would you play these cards? Are any of them broken or busted? How could they have been designed better? Or is there anything obvious that I missed that should have been included or made reference to? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below. Big thank you to Sen, don't forget to check out his work. All of the places you can do so are linked in the description below. Oh, and as I mentioned, if you want to download copies of these cards yourself, you can via my Patreon. Please consider signing up to support me if you do, and as a little incentive for those of you that do check out my Patreon, alongside downloadable copies of these cards, you'll also find Magneto, Homo Superior, whose mechanics I'm not going to spoil here. If you want to see what he does, you're just going to have to check out the links below. And that's it! Big thanks again to Sen for this collab. Doing the X-Men was actually his pitch, but I've picked the next one though, and it's another one with a theme tune that will get stuck in my head. So if you enjoyed this, like and subscribe because that video will be coming out soon. Ish. Thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you to everyone that supports me, like James Diamond, Eggboy the Particle that permeates all existence, and the rest of my patrons whose names are on screen now. I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this video, me and my Patreon page where you can get your name credited on screen too. Check it out in the link in the description below. While you're down there, don't forget to check out Sen's YouTube and subscribe to that also. Hit the like button, leave a comment, install an ad block, most importantly subscribe and share this video with a friend. Hit the notification bell and do all those things the algorithm loves. If you agree or disagree with any of my points, or you want to see me do a video on another subject, let me know and I will see you next time. Mic check 1 2 1 2. Whose benefit have I done that for? It's just me, and I can see it's working.